Welcome to Echo 371, Study Session 9, Fiscal Federation, Introduction. In this session, you'll be introduced to Fiscal Federation. Federalism is a national political system in which more than one level of government controls the same territory and citizens. Fiscal federalism is therefore how the fiscal responsibility, that is, the power and resources, are shared between the central government and lower level of government. We will cap this session and invariably discuss by examining how revenue is allocated using Nigeria as a case study. Learning outcomes. After you have studied this session, you should be able to 1. Define and use correctly the term fiscal federalism. 2. Explain the functions of federal government in an economy. 3. Point out the advantages of fiscal federalism. 4. Explain the disadvantages of fiscal federalism. 5. Discuss the principles and patterns of revenue allocation. The meaning of fiscal federalism. Fiscal federalism is a system where there are more than one level of government in a country, and each level of government having expenditure responsibility and tax power. That is, in a federal setup, there are at least 2 levels of government. Highest level is the federal government, and below are the states and local governments. Fiscal federalism can also be called fiscal decentralization, multi-level finance, and fiscal fragmentation. Fiscal federalism is practiced in some countries such as Nigeria, Canada, Germany, Indonesia, and so on. Functions of federal government. Number 1, stabilization function. Stabilization policies involve the application of monetary and fiscal policy, and it has to be carried out by the federal government for it to be successfully conducted. For instance, stabilization policies require budget surplus or deficit. This results into financial imbalance to state and local governments, as they have to engage in borrowing with a corresponding problem of debt repayment, because states and local government have less access to both the money and capital market. Stabilization policies should be carried out at federal level because it is extremely difficult for each state or local unit to internalize the benefit of fiscal measures adopted. For instance, the gains in implementation of a fiscal policy or fiscal measure to reduce inflation in a particular state may leak to other states. Such leakages are absent or substantially small when fiscal measures are undertaken at the national level. Also, the use of monetary policy by state and local government through money creation is not allowed. It was argued that the power to print and distribute money can be abused by local governments and can lead to financial indiscipline. Therefore, fiscal monetary policy in a federal setup should be solely assigned to the federal government for it to be well implemented. 2. Wealth and income distribution. Policies for effective wealth and income redistribution among individuals and different states must be administered at the federal level to promote economic growth and development. It is only the federal level of government that can effectively implement policies that can help the poor backward state or region to grow by removing all barriers to capital and labor immobility, reduction in excessive regional income differentials, This will help in balancing growth among states and local governments. Therefore, policies to redistribute wealth and income among individuals and states should be conducted nationally. This can be done by adopting progressive system of tax where higher income earners or richer states are taxed more and the revenue derived will be partly transferred to lower income earners or poorer states. 3. Provision of public good. Provision of public good which have a good deal of externalities such as national defense should be provided by the federal government because of non-excludability principle. Also, provision of public services which are consumed by people in more than one state should be provided by federal government, such as interstate transportation, communication, trade and commerce, etc. The provision of such services by any one state may create unnecessary complication because it is difficult to have proper cost-benefit analysis of such services. However, provision of some public services of which the exact need differs from one area to the other, such as sanitation, medical aid, and education, should be provided by the states and the local governments. Advantages of fiscal federalism. A. Fiscal federalism also allows government to provide public goods and services to the preference of the people of the society, unlike a centralized government, where it is assumed that preferences of the people are almost uniform across the country and it is difficult to adjust government activities to reflect the reviewed preference of each individual. It is believed that each state or local government can provide public goods and services which meet the preferences of its people. For instance, a state whose residents have a strong preference for good road or potable water supply will spend its resources providing these services without interfering with another state whose residents have preference for other public goods and services. It is, however, generally acknowledged that people do not reveal their true preferences for public goods. This may make it difficult to adequately ascertain that the goods and services provided are compatible with the preferences of the residents. B. It allows for effective government decision making. Fiscal federalism enhances effective decision making since the number of people involved in decision making process is small. C. It allows for experimentation and innovation in provision of goods and services locally by the government. Fiscal federalism promotes internal competition since there are many states and local governments. Each state can experiment a particular program or policy to find solution to certain problems and compare it with other state programs and policies. With these, new solutions to problems will be sought. Disadvantages of fiscal federalism. Despite the economic advantages of fiscal federalism, there are some difficulties associated with fiscal federalism. A. Attainment of optimal tax structure. Optimal tax structure may be difficult to attain in a decentralized system because each level of government adopts independent tax policy. A fiscal measure adopted in one state, local area may be distorted by the policies adopted in other states or local areas. 1. A particular type of tax that is suitable in certain states or local government areas may be politically and economically dangerous in some other states' local areas. 2. Failure of some states and local government level to adopt a particular tax makes it difficult for other states, local levels, not to adopt such tax. Agreement on the use of a uniform tax system may not be attainable. B. Reduced tax or fiscal capacity. In a federal setup, the ability to raise tax revenue at the lower level of government is reduced compared with the ability of a centralized government to finance the same level of activities. There are certain taxes which cannot be attained by local level of government because they cannot reach the taxpayers by legal means to enforce payment of tax. Also, it may be difficult for a local government to discover property owned by a resident in the local government located outside the area. Some states or local governments may deliberately impose a reduced tax with special concession so as to attract inflow of labor and capital into the state or local area. Such policy may be detrimental to other areas. One effect of a reduced tax capacity is that it limits the activities to be performed by such states or local government. C. Ineffective tax administration and compliance. Tax fragmentation of a decentralized system often leads to duplication of tax effort and compliance activities because each level of government operates machinery of tax administration, and this raises the overall cost of tax collection. At the early stages of economic development, there is the absence of skilled personnel, and facilities for tax administrations are inadequate. All this leads to ineffective tax administration. D. Uneven fiscal capacity. Decentralized system of government gives rise to unequal fiscal capacity. The ability to generate revenue by state and local government to finance their expenditure needs varies from one different state or local level. Also, the needs of different states vary. For instance, the revenue needs of the economically advanced states are low compared to the revenue needs of less developed states. In less developed states, there is need for improvement of social services, improvement of healthcare, and establishment of industries. Also, the level and composition of income in different states and local government areas varies. For instance, those states that have industries will earn larger revenue on sales tax than those who depend mainly on agriculture. Effect of unequal fiscal capacity is that it promotes uneven development among the areas. The wealthy area develops faster than the poorer areas. This problem can be resolved through resource transfer, where the rich states are taxed more and the revenue derived from tax collection will be granted to the poor states. Revenue allocation in Nigeria. Revenue allocation in Nigeria is a subject that deals with sharing of national wealth or revenue between the three levels of government. Revenue allocation in Nigeria has been a very controversial matter because every state wants to have a large share of the federation account to enable it carry out its responsibilities. The main principles of revenue allocation in Nigeria include derivation, population, independent or revenue effort, equality of state, but it has just been included. The landmass and the terrain principle has just been included. Notably, the fiscal arrangement of a federal system should be seen not only as economic technical tool for managing financial relationship between the different levels and units of government, but also as a political machine or political mechanism for deciding who gets what, how, and when, according to Mbanefo 1993. In a federal setup, just as there is issue of political problem of division of functions between the different layers of government, that is the federal, the state, and the local government, there is also issue of financial agreement, both in revenue and expenditure. There are many issues that are yet to be resolved in dividing functions and revenue among the three tiers of government. The problem of how to allocate functions among the three tiers of government, according to James Buchan 1990, two principles exist in allocating functions among the three tiers of government. These are: 1. Geographical range of the spillover effect or benefit from collective action. This implies that federal government should provide those public goods such as defense that have direct benefit to the whole nation. Federal units should provide services or goods that are consumed by people in more than one state. 2. Economic scale. This deals with efficiency, that is, which can perform a particular function best among the three tiers of government, should be given such expenditure functions. For instance, defense is better provided by the federal government at a lower cost due to efficiency than the lower level of government. Also, in assigning tax power, that is the power to collect tax, two principles must be considered. 1. Administrative efficiency. An economical and inexpensive way of collecting public revenue should be adopted by different governments to avoid wastage in an economy. 2. Independent revenue. Each level of government should be given power to raise enough revenue from available revenue source in order to meet its needs. Pattern of revenue allocation. 1. Horizontal revenue allocation. This represents the proportion each unit will get within a given tier of government. This relates to what A will get compared to state B, what local government M will get compared to local government N, out of the federation account. Horizontal revenue allocation is centered on the principles and formula of revenue allocation, such as derivation, population, and national interest. Derivation principle. Derivation principle says that each region should receive revenue in accordance with its contribution to the total revenue in federation account. That is, all revenue which can be identified as having come from or can be attributed to a particular region or state should be allocated to it, according to Phillips 1971. The most important requirement for this principle is that there should be adequate and reliable data for the identification. Several criticisms have been levied against derivation principle. It was argued that A. It makes the rich region richer and the poor regions poorer, since the more developed states will contribute more to the federation account and also get more revenue from the federation account. B. There are no adequate statistical data on the importation of goods on which taxes are imposed for sharing on the basis of derivation. C. It could lead to uneven development, leading to greater disparity among states. Principle of equality of state. Equality of state means that all states are equal and therefore they have equal access to development opportunities. This criterion rests on the notion that each state government carries out some functions as contained in the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. A weight of 40% is assigned to this principle. The revenue from this principle, according to most states' government, is significantly more than internally generated revenue of most of the states. Several criticisms have been levied against this principle. A. It was argued that equality of state principle has led to increase in the agitation for state creation because the revenue allocated to states in this principle is very substantial. B. It was also argued that states may be equal constitutionally but not economically. An economically advanced state should not be treated equally as that of a less developed state. C. This principle influenced the distribution of federal educational institutions and other establishments. Thus, it influenced human capital development. D. The use of this principle violates the principle of equity often stressed by public finance. However, it should be admitted that the use of this principle has largely served the political and economic interests of the dominant ethnic groups. So it is not surprising that it has a weight of 40% because it serves the political and economic interests of the ethnic groups. Principle of population. Population has also featured prominently as a variable for allocating resources among states and local governments in Nigeria. Advocates of this principle posit that development is basically about people and therefore population should be used to allocate resources. It was argued that a large population implies huge substantial government expenditure. Professor Phillips described population as a double-edged principle because it is both an asset and a liability. It is an asset and liability because high population depicts a higher expenditure while at the same time implying buoyant tax revenue. Its use with emphasis on aggregate population is not fair. Demographic features must be considered. Even the consideration of the demographic attributes does not make population an indispensable criterion for revenue allocation. For instance, let's consider two states with the same population. In one of the states, per capita income is at the subsistence level and could not compare favorably with the second state where income is highly unevenly distributed, but the poor state is able to meet its basic needs. Apparently, the needs of the two states are significantly different even though they have the same population. The conclusion emerges that the use of population criterion for revenue sharing is deceitful and misleading. It was acknowledged that the use of population for revenue allocation has made it exceedingly difficult to have a credible head count in Nigeria. In all the post-independent census exercises, that is 1963, 1973, 1991, and 2006, there were controversies, thereby denying our country the numerous advantages of accurate census figures for development planning. However, this criterion is being used with a weight of 30%, and northern Nigeria, led by Kaduna, Kano, Sokoto, and Borno states, were favored. Social development factors. Closely related to population is the social development factor criterion, which carries a weight of 10%. A proxy for this principle is primary school enrollment, to the extent that primary school enrollment in the various states of Nigeria reflect the magnitude of population. It can be concluded that the use of social development factors lead to double counting population. This argument is strengthened by the fact that population factor, which originally attracted a weight of 40%, was later reduced to 30% following the severe criticism leveled against it. It is the reduced 10% from population criterion that is allocated to the social development factor, thereby immensely favoring the populous state. Principle of need. This principle states that more resources should be given to a state or less developed state to bridge the gap in development. States are not equally endowed with resources. Some states are more populated and developed than others. However, there are issues of how to measure the criteria to use in measuring the needs of such states. Should it be based on population, essential social services, etc.? Principle of independent revenue or internal revenue effort. This principle states that each state should receive revenue from the federation account in proportion to its internally generated revenue. This principle de-emphasizes the dependence of state government on federally collected revenue, while it simultaneously emphasizes the fiscal autonomy of the state, therefore judged by the motives of this principle. There is operational problem on how to measure the internal revenue effort of a state government. Also, fiscal fragmentation usually leads to the problem of unequal fiscal capacity of the subordinate units. Based on this situation, the application of this principle obviously favors the richest state and is detrimental to the poor state. This principle cannot be free from the criticisms that are levied against derivation principle, unless this principle puts into consideration an arrangement that adequately considers the differences in the revenue capacity and effort of each state. Land mass and terrain factor. Land mass and terrain is the latest addition to the principle of horizontal revenue allocation. It was recommended by the National Revenue Mobilization Allocation and Fiscal Commission. This principle was not debated nationally when it was introduced, which meant that most Nigerians were not aware of its introduction, according to Guinea in Banefo 1993. More states in northern region supported this principle than states in the south, because the principle favors the region that has political power for a long time. It was criticized because this principle has little or no merit, and proposed that it should be thrown open to public debate so as to establish its relevance. Principles of horizontal revenue allocation. Philipson Commission of 1946 emphasized the principles of derivation, even progress, and population. Philipson Commission of 1951 emphasized derivation, needs, and national interest principles. Cheeks Commission of 1953 emphasized derivation and fiscal autonomy principles. Raysham 1958 Commission emphasized needs and derivation principles. Bing's 1964 Commission emphasized basic needs, financial compatibility principle. Dina 1968 emphasized basic needs, balanced development, derivation, minimum national standard principles. Aboyade 1977 emphasized equality of access to development opportunities, national minimum standard, independent revenue and tax efforts, absorptive capacity, fiscal efficiency principles. Okibo 1979 emphasized minimum responsibility of government, population, social development, internal revenue effort principles. NRMAFC 1989 emphasized equality of state, population, social development factors, tax effort, landmass and terrain principles. Vertical revenue allocation. This deals with how the federation account is shared between federal, state and local governments. Vertical revenue allocation have two approaches, that is, strong central and decentralized government. A strong central approach. Here, the federal government retains the greater proportion of revenue and states as well as local governments have smaller proportion out of the federation account. B. Decentralized approach. The federal government retains a smaller proportion while states and local government get large proportion out of the federation account. Both strong central and decentralized approaches have been practiced in Nigeria between 1946 and 1951. Strong central approach was adopted where federal government retained 80% of revenue collected and the states shared the remaining 20%. From 1952 to 1966, fiscal decentralization approach was adopted where the state government had a greater percentage of revenue generated by the federal government. From 1967 to 1979 was another period that strong central approach was adopted. During this period, about 74% of revenue generated by the federal government was retained by the federal government and 26% was shared by state and local governments. From 1980 to date, there has been intergovernmental conflict over vertical revenue allocation. The states complain about increased responsibility of primary education. The local government complain of the primary healthcare responsibility without a matching increase in revenue from the federation account. The federal government on each side argues that the increased responsibility in terms of university education, radio and television broadcasting, defense, admin, others, calls for a greater share of the federal account. Increase in expenditure on some new projects like steel, petrochemical industries require more funds. Hence, there is need to retain a lion's share of the federation account by the federal government. Summary. In this session, you learned that fiscal federalism is a multi-level system of government where power, resources, and expenditure responsibilities are shared among the levels of government. Fiscal federalism also allows government to provide public goods to the taste of the people. However, the issue of imbalance in distribution of resources and needs among the levels of government has made the fiscal roles sensitive. You have also learned that various principles were adopted in sharing revenue, which include derivation, population, equality of state, independent revenue, landmass, and terrain principles. This is the end of study session 9. Thanks for listening.